Thanks, Helen, and thank you to MedStrom for inviting me to take part in this webinar. It's been great to listen to both Alison, Schofield, and Emily, and interesting to hear about the huge impact that we've been living with with the COVID pandemic. And interestingly, listening to Emily, if only I'd had access to her research when I was doing a literature review. And so, well, looking at my first slide, what I want to share with you is the impact of pressure ulcers on patients' quality of life. So we know, and certainly from some of the aspects that Emily talked about, we know that pressure ulcers have a huge impact. And I want to share that with you. It's important that we hear the patient's voice and that we seek to understand that true experience of patients living with pressure ulcers. So moving on to the next slide, it is about the patient's voice. It's about the patient's experience. And I chose two research papers that were phenomenological in their design and qualitative. So a bit like the process that Emily has talked about. They were smaller studies, they were older studies, as you can see, but although the studies were 12 years apart, the themes were very comparable. And you can see the list of evolving themes there. And that wasn't all of them, but I've chosen 6 key themes because what I also wanted to do was then interview patients. So I interviewed 3 patients using a semi-structured interview technique with open-ended questions to get them to really express their feelings. Slightly different age gaps between them. So one video is a bit older than the others. And what I've been able to do is compare the themes from the literature with what the patients actually told me in the interviews. So really quite emotive in how they come across and how they express their feelings. So the first theme was the perceived etiology of the pressure ulcer, and Emily touched on this as well. It's about the patient's level of understanding, and we have to identify that and sometimes just dig a little bit deeper, not presume that the patient actually knows how they even got the pressure ulcer. And we do talk a lot about risk factors to patients, but do they really understand? There's quite a lot of vagueness here. Before we move on to talk about Ron, there's a vagueness of, oh, I think I got it in the bathroom. So the comments on the left-hand side of these slides are from the research, and then obviously the comparison with the video on each slide. So I think I got it from sitting on the wheelchair for too long. None of those patients actually mentioned pressure. So every patient is different, and every patient will have that different experience and different level of understanding, and it's for us to really get to understand that experience. So the first video, you will meet Ron and Gwen.
Yes, I was getting out of my car between 2 cars, and my chair tipped one way because of the uneven tarmac, and I came out, but they couldn't get me back in the chair from that angle. I couldn't get back in the car from that angle, so they had to drag me. It made a slight graze. The nurses cleared the graze up, but off my tailbone, it was like a sweat mark, and all of a sudden, you took over from there on.
Right.
I went to that picture which we've got, but it's a big mess. And that was the start of it from the word go. I could see something was wrong, my wife standing there. It was just frightening.
And there was infection then at that point. Yes.
That's when they was all saying, "Who's let it get like this? It's your fault," like, you know.
I actually got pressure ulcers in 2 stages, really. I got some in my feet, which occurred approximately 4 years ago, and then due to a bone infection, I got one on my left buttock, which would have been about 1.5 to 2 years ago, I suppose. The ones in my feet occurred, we believe, through pressure, as in weight through my legs into my feet onto the pressure plates. But the one on my left cheek was caused through tracking out from the bone infection I had.
Went into hospital and was immediately on a life support machine for 3 months. And obviously during that period, I wasn't able to be moved very much. And accordingly, the pressure sore must have developed during that time.
Okay, so I think we can see from that the variation in the patient's level of understanding. So although David and Lanny seemed to understand more, there was still that element of vagueness of how much did they truly understand. So that was around the perceived etiology. And the next theme looked at the pain and discomfort. And it's not just the pain and discomfort, and I say that deliberately. It was the intensity and the duration of that pain and discomfort. It was words like, constantly burning, no escape from the pain. And I thought that this was really hard hitting. No escape from pain. That's devastating, to have to live with that pain for something that you could argue could be prevented. And the impact of that on the other aspects that we'll talk about, the social aspects, the psychological aspects. So pain and discomfort has a huge impact on other aspects of quality of life, immeasurable, unbelievable, constant. So let's now look at what the patients we interviewed said about that.
First of all, I'm constantly uncomfortable. I'm at times in great pain. Right now, I'm sitting here, but I'm very uncomfortable. I don't know if you can see it, but I'm sitting on a special cushion, which I have to use whatever I do, wherever I go, whether it be a car, people's homes, flying somewhere. I have to use it because if I don't, the condition worsens and the discomfort increases. So my life is really seriously affected by it.
So you can see the impact that has. It's the word constant, never ending, continued pain. Just waiting for the next slide to come up. So moving on from that element of pain and discomfort and looking at how that then impacts on the other aspects of quality of life. There's a physical functioning, and this was a very common aspect that all patients, both in the literature and in the patients that I interviewed, it wasn't an inconvenience. It was a physical aspect of that changed their life. It changed how they were able to function physically. It changed how they felt about themselves psychologically. Spending a number of birthdays in hospital, and you'll hear Ron's experience. Not being able to sleep the way that they normally go to sleep. The impact of that change in the physical functioning is enormous. So let's listen to Ron and the other interviews.
Why do you think we kind of the nurses say you must stay for a longer period of time in bed?
Look, because the pressure shot, so you can't sit off it. I've got to keep off it. At the present moment, my wife's been really seriously ill. I've been married to her for 50 years. I spent my golden wedding anniversary in the city hospital just lately, July. It was lovely, your golden wedding anniversary. But she's been really, really ill. And at 3 o'clock in the morning, she gets out of that bed. She can't even stand up some nights because she's got stars in front of her eyes. But she's still turning every 3 hours. Just get up. If you've got your wife laying in bed poorly and you can't get up to make her a cup of tea, or you can't get a slice of toast or something just to help her, I mean, she's not been eating, but that drives you mad. That really cuts through you. You're helpless. And yet she's still got to go and look after me. Well, I'm perfectly fit, apart from an ulcer on my backside. And you think to yourself, this is not right.
I was in hospital a total of 9 months, and nobody in that period was able to help or rectify the thing. Certainly I had help from tissue viability, but there was no great improvement because I was lying down for such a long time. So the extensive effort to improve my situation could only start after I came out of hospital in around about July, August 2011. And pretty well, I think it's correct to say that Alison was seeing me maybe almost weekly. and to try and start the process of the wound being healed. But it got to a point where no further improvement was being experienced, and I was put on a vac machine for a very long time. I think 1.5 years. I had this machine on my shoulder, around my waist, to try and improve the condition of the wound. It got to a point probably about a year and a half ago, where there wasn't any further improvement from the vac, so I was taken off the machine, and discussions were started as to whether or not surgery could be considered.
The ones on my feet, which is on left and right foot, became quite infected, and then eventually it went down to the bone, which took a long period of time to then rebuild itself, as in repair itself outwards. And the one on my cheek was a good about 6 inches deep, with a big sort of cavity at the end of it, and it was the cavity which took time to. Well, I had to have an operation, which they drained and healed, and again spent a good 2-3 months basically laying on your front in the bed just to try and repair it. And now, even now, I still have to be very conscious of the fact of releasing any pressure. So I spend predominantly quite a fair bit of time resting, which again, as previously said, it hinders your ability to go out and about, really.
Yeah, so the impact on the physical aspect of those patients' lives is huge. Having to endure bed rest for that length of time was a huge factor, and to think that patients live with those pressure ulcers for that length of time, with all of those different treatments and interventions, and the frustration that brings, it has a huge impact on their lives. I think I was going to say the biggest factor, but I think they all play such a big role in terms of the impact on patients' quality of life. There were different words and experiences used within the psychological well-being of those patients' lives, but very hard-hitting words of misery, depression, anger, irritation, you know, almost experiencing some of those grieving processes of what those patients and certainly Ron's wife were experiencing. Again, the anger and the irritation about the physical impact, you know, not being able to do what they want to do, fed up with the length of time those wounds take to heal. And there is some stoicism, and we'll see that when we look at the next video, some stoicism and acceptance on one side, but then an open and honest fear explained on the other side. So let's have a look at the next video.
Just one of those things.
I would say the pressure ulcer has been your jailer, really, because it's stopped him from doing everything that we would normally do.
It's had such
It's the thing that gets you more than anything else. The sun shining outside.
yeah.
I'm feeling fit. I can't get out. As my wife will tell you, people look really, why are you still in bed? Like, you don't want to get up. Or you're always happy. But they don't know. I'm not going to lay there crying because they're there. Me and Gwen will cry on his own. We can manage. But why are we staying in bed? Or what kind of life have you got?
You can be frustrated and sad, and we mustn't get bitter.
Do you
Because
feel better?
I do sometimes. Ron doesn't. He is really, really brave. But I want him to be better. I just worry when he gets ill that, is this the last time? Because he has been so very ill over the time that he's, had the pressure sore.
Yeah, so you can see the stoicism with Ron there, but the open honesty of Gwen, and the fear that she was experiencing of every time he was admitted to hospital with a wound infection, or in another case he was admitted with septicemia. That fear that the family experience, is this going to be the last time I'm going to see him? And that's quite an incredible psychological impact, again going back to something that potentially can be prevented. And to think of the pressure ulcer as a jailer that's about imprisonment, that's about loss of independence, and it's a very emotive analogy, really, to think of a pressure ulcer as a jailer. So the social functioning was another theme that came throughout the research and with speaking to the patients. And again, it was about that isolation. It's about having to stay in your room, linked to the having to spend more time on the bed. But the other aspect of deliberately not participating because of the fear of the smell being obvious, or because of the pain that those patients were experiencing. So let's think about the social functioning, particularly with Ron and Gwen.
What have the last 2 Christmases been like for you?
22 people all around this bedroom. A few twigs painted silver in the corner there with baubles on. My grandchildren around me and quiz shows. And no, I've got a marvellous family.
We always make a lot of Christmas and birthdays.
Every Saturday they come down, every Saturday.
Before he was confined to bed for this last 2.5 years, as he said previously, we were never in. We were out every day. After I retired, that was it. We'd get up anywhere, just to be going somewhere, seeing people. We went to theatre. We had, pre-theatre dinners, treats, because we could. And, aside from the paraplegia, if you want to go to London for the day, you have to book the train. That's just a little bit of irksomeness, really, that you have to book everywhere before you go anywhere, But apart from that, we have done as we please. People think that he doesn't care that he's in the position he's in, but of course he does. He wants to be out and about again.
Oh, more, as you know, especially when it's sunshine, you don't feel ill. Get out in the garden, do a bit of pottering around, get in the car and go.
Imagine carrying a vacuum machine around with you on the side of your body, or carrying it over your shoulder. The noise, people always asking you why, what, how, and you know very well that it's the only possible opportunity to improve your health situation. So my life is pretty bad at that.
Yeah, so very hard hitting about the quality of life aspect for those patients, and the sort of the way that all of those themes impact on each other. So how the social functioning and the loss of independence, impacts on that psychological well-being. So yeah, I was going to say something else, but it's gone. So I shall move on to the last theme. And really that theme takes us back to the very first theme about that limited or that vague etiology of the patient's level of understanding of etiology, of how the pressure ulcer developed. And this takes us back to their recognition, the patient's recognition that they need a better knowledge and understanding. And hindsight's a wonderful thing, and you'll see that with Dave when he's talking about it. I wish I'd known how to prevent a pressure ulcer before getting one. Can we really say that we can achieve that in clinical practice today? I know you need to move around as much as you can, and maybe there's many patients that can't, but if they'd known more, would they have been able to do more? And there's an element of disbelief that I've seen as well through interviewing those patients, an element of it won't happen to me. So it kind of takes us back to the first theme, but let's look at what Dave tells us.
When I first came out of hospital, you was told about pressure sores and to be careful of them, but you didn't really, I would say, take much notice, but it was sort of, it won't happen to me. But of course, when it does happen to you, it left me, as I say, in bed for approximately 20 hours per day, which meant that, because I was working at the time, so my work commitments had to cease. Family activities were reduced, because obviously you couldn't go out and about because you was predominantly on bed rest, really.
Yeah. So a huge impact, and I think what's really interesting, which is what I was going to say before, both Ron and Dave are paraplegic, And they don't talk about that and the impact that that has on their life, because they don't see that as having an impact on their quality of life. And as Gwen said, they had a good life socially. They carried on. Having to book the train because of him being paraplegic was a bit troublesome, but not a problem. It was the pressure ulcer for all of those patients that impacted on their quality of life. So in summary, we can see that pressure ulcers have a profound impact on health-related quality of life. And we also know that quality of life is measurable. You know, we've said for a long time it's not really measurable, but actually, you know, from Emily's work, from the studies that I've picked the themes out of, and from talking to those patients, quality of life is measurable. And it looks at, and it's really important to take on board, the physical functioning, the psychological well-being, and the social functioning, and the impact, the true impact that has on those patients who are living to tell their story. The other themes that were picked out was, Emily alluded to some of this as well, but the inconsistencies in pressure ulcer management between hospital and community. And that might be about communication, but actually some of that caused the patients fear and distress, the different types of treatment. You know, Ron in another part of that video says, you know, I've had everything, you know, you name it, and I've had it on this pressure ulcer, and the frustration that brings of, you know, things aren't always working that well, and the pressure ulcer pain not necessarily being assessed, and we see this today, and patients refusing equipment because it's not comfortable, or because the cushions feel unstable, or because it made the chair too high. So lots of issues that then impact on why that pressure ulcer perhaps isn't healing. And patients were able to acknowledge, and this was a common theme, that if they'd had more information about pressure ulcers, they would have been able potentially to take better care of themselves. So it's about that perception, that understanding. And of most of the patients interviewed, they did not know what a pressure ulcer was. And one patient was actually confused with, well, I've heard of a gastric ulcer, but how can I, what's the difference between a gastric ulcer and a pressure ulcer? And that it's the word ulcer that then made me think about, you know, are we using the right terminology? And a common theme, clearly no surprise there, that most patients did believe that pressure ulcer prevention is better than cure. So thank you for listening.